He promised me we'd grow old together. Those were his exact words, whispered in my ear the night we retired. When the house finally went quiet, after decades of work and raising children. "It's just us now," he said, brushing my hair back as though we had all the time in the world. And I believed him. I built my days around that promise. Quiet mornings with coffee, crossword puzzles at the kitchen table, holding hands on the porch while the sun dipped behind the trees. But promises age differently than people. Some of them turn brittle, like old paper, ready to crumble with the lightest touch. I found that out on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't suspicion that led me to it, just habit. He'd left his tablet on the arm of the sofa, screen still glowing. He'd gone out for groceries, humming like always, as if the world was normal. I meant only to switch it off. My fingers brushed the screen, and suddenly there it was. A message thread I shouldn't have seen. Her name lit up like a slap across the face. She couldn't have been more than half my age, and her words read like a script from some adolescent fantasy. "I can't wait for our trip. I love imagining our life together." Our life. Not his life, not her life. Our. That single word burned a hole in my chest. At first I told myself it couldn't be what it looked like. Maybe she was a colleague, a niece, a friend, joking badly. But then I scrolled, against my own will, almost like my body betrayed me, and saw pictures. Her in a short dress, kissing the air at the camera. Him replying with hearts and promises. Promises that belonged to me. I didn't cry. That surprised me. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the tablet, but no tears came. Instead, I felt this strange, icy calm, like when you step into a cold lake and your body goes numb before the ache sets in. My heart pounded, but my mind whispered, "So this is how it ends." I sat in that silence, looking around the living room we'd built together. Every photograph, every couch cushion, every curtain a reminder of decades spent side by side. How many times had I ignored the small cracks, the late nights, the distracted answers? I used to think long marriages came with comfortable silences. Now I wondered if some of those silences had been hiding lies. A thought struck me, sharp and unwelcome. 70. I am 70 years old. What kind of fool starts over at 70? The world tells you once you're past a certain age, you cling to what you have. You keep the man, even if he strays. You patch the holes, even if the roof caves in. Because the alternative, freedom, is painted as loneliness. But as I sat there, the icy calm turned to fire. My pulse thudded in my ears. Half my age, the girl young enough to be his daughter? He wanted a future with her, while I was still here cooking his meals, folding his shirts, making space for his comfort. Rage began to crowd out fear. I had given him my youth, my middle years, my loyalty. And this was how he thanked me, by planning his escape route into someone else's bed. The front door clicked open. His keys rattled in the bowl by the wall. I closed the tablet and set it back on the sofa, my face composed, my heart still a storm. He walked in carrying bags of groceries, whistling. For a second, I studied him like a stranger. The slope of his shoulders, the lines on his face. The man who once felt like home. How strange, how cruel, that you can share a lifetime with someone and suddenly not know who they are. He looked up, smiled, and asked if I wanted tea. I said nothing. My voice might have cracked if I'd tried. Instead, I stood, walked past him, and locked myself in the bathroom. Behind the door, I stared at my reflection. My hair silver, my eyes hard, my breath shallow. I didn't see a weak woman. I saw someone who'd been underestimated one too many times. In that moment, I made a quiet vow. If he thought he could build a future without me, if he thought I'd sit quietly in the shadows while he played lover to a girl who could be our granddaughter, he had mistaken me entirely. I wasn't going to be discarded. Not at 70. Not ever. When you've been married for nearly 5 decades, the years wrap around you like a quilt. Some squares bright with joy, weddings, births, vacations. Others muted, stitched with ordinary routines, paying bills, repainting the kitchen, standing side by side at funerals. That's what I thought marriage was. A patchwork of everything, good and bad, held together by time. I carried that quilt proudly. I thought he did too. Looking back now, I can see where the seams started to fray. Nights when he stayed in the den, claiming he was too tired to come to bed. Weekends when he insisted on errands that stretched far too long. I told myself he just needed space. After all, hadn't I needed my own? Marriage isn't about constant fireworks. It's about tolerance, companionship, the ability to sit in the same room without needing words. That's what I told myself, again and again, whenever a pang of doubt tugged at me. But doubt is a quiet thief. It steals before you even notice what's missing. I remember the early years, how young we were, full of fight and hope. He was ambitious. I was steady. I raised the children while he built a career. We weren't rich, but we managed. I skipped new coats, worked part-time jobs, packed lunches every day. He liked to say I was the backbone of the family. I liked to believe him. Now I wonder if those words were just a convenient shield, something he could say to keep me rooted while he drifted. What cuts deepest isn't only that he strayed, it's that he planned a future with someone else. After all, we had already survived together. Illness, layoffs, mortgages, the loss of our parents. We weathered storms I thought would sink us. And when we finally reached calmer waters, when the children were grown and we could finally sit down and breathe, he looked at the horizon and decided to jump ship. It's almost comical, the timing of it. At 70, people say you're supposed to be winding down, grateful for stability. Friends of mine joke about their husbands napping more than they talk. We laugh about the dullness of routine. I used to laugh too. But routine is safety. Routine is trust. And he traded ours for excitement, for the shiny promise of a woman half his age. Half his age. That phrase loops in my mind like a curse. Do you know what a woman half my age is doing? She's starting a career. Maybe raising children. Maybe buying her first home. She hasn't felt her knees ache in the morning, hasn't stayed up all night holding a feverish baby, hasn't sat through a doctor's warning about cholesterol or blood pressure. She doesn't carry the weight of decades on her shoulders. And that's what he wanted, to shed the weight, to pretend time could be reversed if he wrapped himself in someone younger. I wrestle with that thought at night. Am I angry at him for betraying me? Or am I angry because I let myself become invisible? Did I stop being a wife and become only a fixture in his house, a background character in his story? I gave so much of myself, poured years into keeping everything afloat. And still, he went searching. People think older women don't feel rage, don't feel desire, don't feel the sting of betrayal the way the young do. But let me tell you, betrayal at 70 is a sharper knife. It comes with the knowledge that time is no longer abundant. When you're young and your heart breaks, people tell you, you'll find love again. When you're 70, they pat your hand and say, at least you had a long marriage. As if endurance should make up for being discarded. I refuse that narrative. I may be 70, but I am not a relic to be pitied. I am not an old coat hung by the door while he goes out wrapped in something new. The weight of years can be crushing, yes, but it can also anchor you. It reminds you of who you've been, what you've survived. I am the woman who kept this family standing through every storm. I am the one who stitched that quilt square by square. And if he thinks he can take it from me, unravel the fabric of my life without consequence, he is mistaken. It took me decades to realize it, but the years that once felt like a chain are now my proof of strength. Every wrinkle on my face, every ache in my body, Every sleepless night I spent keeping our home together. They are not marks of weakness. They are scars of survival. And if I could survive that, I can survive him. I didn't plan the confrontation. It wasn't some neatly rehearsed speech in front of the mirror. It came like a storm I could no longer hold back. For 2 days after I found the messages, I stayed quiet. Not because I was weak, but because I wanted to feel the edges of my anger, to test it. I cooked his dinner, folded his shirts, nodded at his stories, as if nothing had changed. But inside me, a voice was building, a roar I'd swallowed for years, perhaps. And on the third night, it broke. We were sitting in the kitchen, the evening news muttering in the background. He was buttering bread like it was any other night, like the air wasn't thick with lies. I stared at his hands, those familiar hands I once trusted with my heart, and the words escaped before I could stop them. "So?" I said, my tone colder than the tile beneath my feet. "When were you planning to tell me about her?" The knife froze halfway through the bread. His head jerked up, eyes wide, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for water. What are you talking about?" I didn't flinch. "Don't insult me. I saw the messages, the pictures, the future you're busy building with your little friend while I sit here like a fool." His face flushed a deep, guilty red. He stammered something about just a flirtation and meaning nothing. The classic lines men like him pull from their pockets when they're caught with their lies laid bare. "Nothing." I spat the word like poison. "You told her you couldn't wait to share a life together. That's not nothing. That's betrayal." For a moment, the mask slipped. Anger replaced his shame. "You went through my things? That's private," he snapped, as though I were the one who had crossed the line. That's when something inside me hardened. Private? After all these years? After everything we built together, you dare to call her private? My voice rose, cracking with decades of swallowed silence. "I gave you my best years. I raised your children, supported your dreams, kept this house standing. And you repay me by chasing a girl who could be your granddaughter?" He tried to soften then, his tone syrupy, pleading. "It's just a phase. You know I love you. You know you're my wife, my partner. Don't throw it all away over one mistake." One mistake. That phrase nearly broke me, not with sadness, but with laughter. Bitter, sharp laughter that startled even me. One mistake? A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is leaving the milk out on the counter. What you did was a choice. Every message, every promise to her. That was a choice. His eyes darted away, his shoulders slumping. For the first time I saw the smallness of him. Not the husband I once idolized, not the father of my children, not the man who vowed to grow old with me. Just a weak, aging man, desperate to outrun his own reflection in the mirror. And in that moment, I stopped seeing him as my partner. He was just another man who underestimated me, who thought my age would make me grateful for scraps. "I'm done," I said finally, my voice low but steady. "Done with your lies, your excuses, your cowardice? You want her? Then have her. But don't expect me to sit here and play the fool any longer." His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Words scrambled to the surface, half-formed apologies, half-baked promises. I didn't listen. For the first time in years, I felt my own strength fill the room. He reached for my hand. I pulled it back. That gesture, simple as it was, sealed everything. His face crumpled, not from love, but from fear. He knew then what I already knew. The balance of power had shifted. I wasn't his silent partner anymore. I stood up, chair scraping the floor, and left him sitting there with his untouched bread and his hollow excuses. My heart was pounding, my body trembling, but my spirit was steady. In that moment, I understood something I should have seen long ago. Love isn't measured by how many years you've endured together. It's measured by respect, by loyalty, by truth. And once those are gone, the years mean nothing. I went to bed alone that night, but I didn't feel lonely. For the first time in decades, I felt free. There comes a point when anger stops burning and hardens into resolve. That's where I found myself in the days after our confrontation. The shouting, the excuses, the tears that never came. I'd gone through all of it. What remained was a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I realized I had two choices. I could stay, patch up the ruins, and play the dutiful wife while he lived out his fantasy with her in secret. Or I could walk away, with dignity intact, and carve out whatever life remained for me. At 70, most people would have told me to choose the first path. Be grateful for what you have. It's too late to start again. At least you're not alone. The world pities women my age. They expect us to be silent, forgiving, endlessly accommodating. But the more I thought about it, the more I knew. I couldn't let his betrayal define the last chapter of my story. The first step was money. Money is freedom, especially for women who've spent their lives supporting someone else's ambitions. He built a career, yes, but I built the foundation it stood on. Every paycheck he earned was bolstered by the hours I poured into raising children, keeping the household, working odd jobs when we needed them. I may not have drawn the salary, but make no mistake, I had earned my share. So I went to a lawyer. I remember walking into that office, my hands trembling just enough to betray the storm inside me. The receptionist looked at me kindly, maybe surprised to see a woman with silver hair asking for a divorce consultation. But when I sat across from the attorney and explained, my voice didn't waver. I want what's mine, I said. I want his pension. It wasn't greed, it was survival. That pension represented decades of my life. Every sacrifice, every compromise, every dream postponed. If he wanted to run off and chase youth, fine. But I wasn't going to let him drag me into poverty while he played house with someone half my age. The lawyer nodded, jotting down notes. She spoke with the calm certainty of someone who had seen this story before, many times over. You've got rights, she assured me. Especially after this many years of marriage. Don't let him tell you otherwise. Her words lit something in me. For the first time since discovering his betrayal, I felt like I had leverage, like I wasn't powerless. When I told him I'd filed, his face collapsed. The arrogance drained out of him. He sputtered about loyalty, about keeping things in the family, about what the children would say. He begged me to reconsider, to remember the good years, to think of my own security. But that was exactly the point. I was thinking of my security, and his pension was the key to it. I'll never forget the look in his eyes when he realized I wasn't bluffing. It wasn't heartbreak. It wasn't even shame. It was fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of facing the world without the quiet woman in the background who made his life seamless. He had underestimated me, and now he was watching the cost of that mistake unravel in front of him. Filing those papers was terrifying. I won't pretend otherwise. The courthouse smelled of old wood and disinfectant, and my legs felt heavy as lead as I signed my name. But with each signature, I felt lighter. Every stroke of the pen was a declaration. I am not disposable. I am not invisible. Walking out of that building, I inhaled the autumn air as though it were the first breath I'd taken in years. The sky was gray, the wind sharp, but I felt alive, free. People think freedom at 70 is pointless, that it's too late to reinvent yourself, too late to reclaim what was stolen. But I disagree. Freedom doesn't have an age limit. Freedom is the right to live without betrayal weighing down your chest. And that day, I secured mine. He had promised me we'd grow old together. Well, I kept part of the promise. We grew old. But together? No, not anymore. The papers were filed, the wheels set in motion. For all my bravado, though, the silence that followed was heavy. It's one thing to summon rage in the heat of betrayal, another to live with the absence of someone who's been by your side for half a century. The first nights alone were the hardest. The bed felt enormous, an ocean of cool sheets where once there had been warmth, even if only the lukewarm kind that routine provides. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the clock. Time can be cruel when it has no distractions. Every hour stretched longer than the last. Grief crept in quietly. Not grief for him exactly, but for the version of us I thought we were. For the decades I'd believed in his promise. For the sacrifices I'd made in good faith. It felt like mourning a ghost. Something that had died long ago, only I hadn't noticed until now. Friends cold, of course. Some offered sympathy, others pity. A few hinted, though they wouldn't dare say it outright, that maybe I should have let it slide. At our age, isn't companionship worth more than pride? Shouldn't I have turned a blind eye? That kind of talk stung, but it also steeled me, because I knew the answer. No, pride isn't the enemy of companionship. Pride is what keeps companionship honest. Without it, you're just a shadow clinging to someone else's life. I wasn't going to be that shadow. Still, the loneliness was real. Mornings especially. I'd shuffle into the kitchen, 2 mugs staring back at me from the cupboard. For decades I'd brewed coffee for both of us, even on mornings when we barely spoke. Now I stood there with the habit, but not the reason. Sometimes I made 2 mugs anyway, just to fill the silence. Sometimes I poured the second one down the sink and felt ridiculous for crying over coffee. But slowly, very slowly, the shape of my days began to change. I started walking in the mornings, bundled against the chill, watching the world wake up around me. The rhythm of my feet on the pavement was grounding, a reminder that my body was still strong, still mine. Neighbors waved, some curious, some kind. For the first time in years, I looked people in the eye instead of rushing past. I dug out old hobbies, too. Things I'd abandoned when life with him had consumed my energy. My paints, tucked away in a dusty box. My gardening gloves, stiff with disuse. Even crossword puzzles felt different when I did them for myself, not as filler between cooking and cleaning. The strangest thing was realizing how much space I suddenly had. Space in the house, in the schedule, in my mind. Space he had filled with his needs, his habits, his moods. At first, that space was frightening. Then, it became possibility. Of course, his shadow lingered. I'd see his favorite chair, the dent in the cushion a reminder of his nightly routine. I'd hear a song on the radio and feel my throat tighten. I'd walk into the grocery store and instinctively reach for the brand of cereal he liked before catching myself. These small ghosts haunted me, and some days they still do. But the longer I lived without him, the clearer it became. I wasn't mourning the man. I was mourning the illusion of him. The man I loved had disappeared years ago, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. The only reason I hadn't noticed was because I was too busy holding the pieces together. Now, for the first time in my adult life, I didn't have to hold anyone else's pieces, just my own. It wasn't glamorous. There were no grand adventures, no instant reinvention. Just small steps. A lunch with an old friend I hadn't seen in years. An evening spent watching a film of my choosing, without compromise. A long bath, just because I felt like it. It struck me then how easily women lose themselves in the name of partnership. How we forget that our lives are more than extensions of someone else's. I was 70, yes. But 70 isn't nothing. 70 is still breathing, still walking, still laughing when the chance arises. 70 is still here. And so was I. It didn't take long for him to come knocking. Men like him don't handle being left behind. They're used to walking out, not being walked away from. At first, it was calls, his name lighting up my phone again and again. I let them ring. Sometimes he left messages, his voice heavy with a rehearsed sorrow. "We can fix this. Don't throw away 50 years. Think of the children." Each word tasted of desperation, not love. Then he started showing up. At the front door with flowers, with groceries, with the same pleading eyes that once made me forgive his smaller sins. He tried to stand in the doorway like he belonged there, like he could just slip back into the space he had abandoned. "I made a mistake," he said one afternoon, voice quivering. "It didn't mean anything. She didn't mean anything. You're my wife. You're my life." I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, the scent of roses between us turning sour in the heat. "If she didn't mean anything," I asked, "then why did you plan a life with her?" He froze. His mouth opened, then shut. He didn't have an answer. That was the moment I realized his begging wasn't about love. It was about fear. Fear of aging alone. Fear of losing the comfort I provided. Fear of facing himself without the buffer of my loyalty. He tried everything after that. Promises of change. Apologies that grew more elaborate with each attempt. He painted our life together in glowing colors, as though I had forgotten the decades of silence, of compromises, of his betrayal carved deep into the last chapter. And for a moment, just a moment, I wavered. How could I not? 50 years of routine doesn't vanish overnight. My body still knew the shape of him. My mind still reached for his presence in quiet moments. Familiarity is a powerful chain. But then I looked closer. His words weren't about me. They were about him. About what he stood to lose. The warmth of a home he hadn't maintained. The security of a woman who had carried him through storms. The respectability of a marriage he had already discarded. He wasn't begging for me. He was begging for himself. And that clarity cut through every doubt. I told him no. Not in anger, not in tears, but in a steady voice that surprised even me. "You don't get to choose when I matter. You don't get to treat me like a safety net you can fall back into when your fantasy collapses. You lost me the moment you handed my place to her." He broke then. His shoulders slumped. His eyes glistened. His words tumbled over themselves. He reached for my hand, desperate, trembling. But I pulled back. "No," I said again. Just that one word. But it carried the weight of my years, the strength of every sacrifice, every indignity swallowed, every promise broken. And with that, something inside me shifted. For decades, I had been the one trying to hold us together. Now, I was the one walking away. And for once, I didn't feel guilt. I felt power. After he left that day, the roses still sat in their vase, unopened buds drooping by nightfall. I didn't bother to water them. They withered in silence, a perfect symbol of what he and I had become, something that once carried beauty, but could no longer hold life. I slept soundly that night, alone, but at peace. When the dust settled, when the papers were signed and his footsteps faded from my doorway, I found myself staring at a question I hadn't asked in decades. Who am I without him? At first, the answer felt terrifying. For so long, my identity was woven with his. I was his wife, the keeper of his home, the mother of his children, the silent partner holding the quilt of our life together. Without him, would I simply unravel? But each day proved otherwise. Slowly, carefully, I stitched something new. I started with the small things, repainting the living room a color I liked, not one chosen in compromise. Moving his chair to the garage so its dent no longer haunted me. Cooking meals just for me, seasoned the way I preferred. No negotiations, no appeasement. Freedom didn't roar into my life. It came quietly, like dawn. Subtle at first, then undeniable. I began reaching out. Old friends I hadn't seen in years, neighbors I'd only waved at from a distance. Some invited me for tea, others for walks. Conversation bloomed, laughter resurfaced. I realized how isolated I had let myself become, orbiting around a man who had stopped seeing me long before I stopped seeing myself. And then there was travel. Not far, not extravagant. A weekend by the sea, just me and the sound of waves. I walked along the shore with no one to hurry me, no one to dismiss my wonder at the gulls circling overhead or the shells at my feet. I had thought adventure belonged to the young, but standing there with salt air filling my lungs, I understood. It belongs to anyone brave enough to claim it. Grief still lingered, of course. Some mornings, I'd wake with that ache, the phantom presence of someone who once promised forever. But grief softened into something else. Perspective. I began to see my life not as ruined, but as rewritten. The betrayal was a fracture, yes. But fractures heal, sometimes stronger than before. What surprised me most was how light I began to feel. Not because I had erased the past, but because I no longer carried his weight. The constant monitoring of moods, the endless adjustments, the silent compromises, they were gone. My shoulders felt freer, my breath deeper. And here is what I know now. Age is not a cage. At 70, people expect you to shrink, to cling, to settle for scraps because time is running out. But I discovered the opposite. At 70, I have nothing left to prove, no one to please but myself. I am not starting from scratch. I am starting from strength. He promised me we'd grow old together. And in a way, we did. But the truth is, I grew old in loyalty, and he grew old in betrayal. And when the time came to choose, I chose myself. Sometimes, late at night, I picture him, alone in some rented apartment, or worse, still chasing youth that slips further away with each passing year. I don't picture him with bitterness anymore. I picture him with clarity. He made his choice, and I made mine. My life now is not the life I expected. It isn't grand, it isn't flawless, but it is mine. Every choice, every step, every breath belongs to me. And that is a freedom more precious than any promise he could have made. So here's the truth. I did keep the promise after all. I grew old, faithful to the woman in the mirror, faithful to my own heart. And that, finally, is enough.